This is Woody Pewitt from DevExpress. Today I want to go ahead and show you how to get started with the pivot grid control for WinForms. Here I have a demo application, and I've already gone ahead and created the application, and right now I want to actually go ahead and add some data for us to be able to use. Now, I've created a blog post about how I shaped this data, so I'm not going into a lot of detail about it, but I'm just going to go ahead and add a new item here. And the type of item that I want to add is going to be a data set, and I'm going to call this the NW data set, if I can get the cursor in the right place. And now add that to my project. Now, at this point, I could do this in a lot of different ways, but I'm going to do it in a pretty simplistic way by bringing in a table adapter and having it go ahead and connect to my Northwind connection string. I'm going to use a SQL statement, and that SQL statement, I'm going to use some magic cut and paste here. And I'm going to be bringing in a category name, a product name, the product sales information, and the ship date of particular orders. So in other words, for each order that's been shipped, I'm going to calculate the product sales price for a particular product name with its category. The thing I don't want to do is I don't want to bring in orders that haven't been shipped, so I'm going to get rid of all orders that have a shipped date of null. Click Next. That's going to go ahead and let me specify the type of ways I want it to fill. I'm going to use the defaults. And finally, it tells me that it went ahead and generated all of my table adapter methods correctly. So here's my data table. Just going to rename my data table to sales data table. And now I have some data I can start using. Yeah, save that. So next I want to go ahead and incorporate my pivot grid control onto my form. And I'm going to simply have this pivot grid control anchor itself to all four sides of my WinForm. I could just dock it in the middle, but I kind of like to do anchoring a little more. Just my little strangeness. And now I'm going to go ahead and hook up my data source for this. And all I have to do is bring up the tasks menu here and say choose data source. And you can see I can drill into my project. If I had other data sources, I could select any one of them, but in this instance I've created a link to that sales data table adapter, and it's gone ahead and added all the controls that I need to be bound. So now I have a bound pivot grid. Now the problem with this is the pivot grid is knowledgeable of the data that I'm bound to, but it has no idea of the actual columns or fields that I want to be able to actually show. So there's a couple of ways I could do this. I can do it in code, which I have a blog post about how you can do it, but the much simpler and straightforward way is to bring up the designer. Now again, through the tasks menu I can hit run designer, or if you notice down at the bottom of the properties window, I can also click run designer. So let me go ahead and run this designer, and you can see here I've got the different fields that it knows it's bound to, but the pivot grid itself doesn't have any fields associated with it yet. So to get the fields that I want over here where the pivot grid will know about them, I can simply just go ahead and click add to add fields and then associate them. Or even simpler, since I'm just beginning, I can just say retrieve fields, and that will wind up going ahead and pulling over the default values for all these fields. And at this point, I can go ahead and close my designer, and I can even go ahead and run the project. And you'll see that the form pops up, really has everything that I actually need, but it may not be very satisfactory for an end user. So here I can go ahead and add things like category names. I can put the product sales as the data that I care about, and ship data in here. I can even go ahead and add the product name in there so that I get a further breakdown. But I have a couple of issues. If I rerun this project, if I stop it and rerun it, all of my fields once again will wind up being up here in the filter area. And that's not very good for most end users. They probably want a default view, as well as I've got an issue where I'm showing each date an order was filled, and you can see I've got a lot of blank information here. So I probably want to do more data summarization around the date here. So we're going to do two things. We're going to lay this form out, and then we're going to also do some simple data summarization. So I'm going to go back here to my form and back to the designer, because the designer lets me do everything that I want to do here. And there's a couple of ways I could do this. I could do this field by field, coming in here, and here's the category name, and you can see these are all the different properties associated with it. And I could actually go ahead and specify what area I want this particular field to be in, either the row area, the column area, currently the field area, or the data area. But there's also this layout portion of this designer, and this lets me do this really fast just by giving me a view of the grid as if it were running. And now I can just go ahead and drag and drop elements, and they're going to wind up going ahead and changing the various properties of what area these fields should show up in. So now I can hit apply, and if I close this, you can see now my grid's all laid out exactly like I wanted. The other thing that we wanted to do though was actually summarize this data here. So I'm going to run the designer once again, and this time go to the date, and you'll see that I can go ahead and do some grouping on these. So you can see here I've got group interval, and it's set to default, so whatever the data is will be reflected in each column. But I can actually group these up, and a good grouping at this point might be, let's just do, how about month? So we have date month. Just so that we wind up keeping things up to date, I'm actually going to go ahead and say month shipped date. So that's going to be the column name that we see now. So here I've got that new caption, push run, and the form now has each of the dates in here. Now once again, that's pretty good, but the problem is there's a lot of different months that have the same caption, and so I don't really know exactly what I'm looking at here. What I really want is some context of which year I'm dealing with too. So what I need to do is actually add another field, but if you remember in our layout here for the fields, we're only shown 4 fields that we can pick from, and we went ahead and pulled those over. Well, what I really want to do now is add a manual field. So I'm just going to click add field, and here's a field that I can now do anything with. It's not associated with anything yet. And so now I want to go ahead and set a few properties to get this thing looking the way I want. First, I'm going to go ahead and say year shipped And then I'm going to come down, and it says what area do I want this, and I do want this in the column area, but I want it to be the first element in the column area. So I'm going to go ahead and hit 0 on that. And now on my group interval, I want to go ahead and select the date year. And then finally, I actually need to associate it with the bit of data that I want it to display. And once again, I'm going to show the shipped date. Now, that means I have two fields, the shipped date and this one, the grid field, both associated with shipped dates. But because their interval are different, they're going to appear to be different areas for end users to look at. I'm just also going to clean up this label, make it a little smaller on month, and close this. And now you can see I have year shipped and month. Go ahead and run this, and now this is looking pretty good, because now I have a year and each month for that year listed, and I can go ahead and collapse this down to see the next year, or I could collapse all of them down. I could even go ahead and if they're expanded, I could actually remove month and just see the years. This is pretty good. I'm liking this. The next thing that I want to be able to do, though, is actually stop the user from doing things like, at this point, they could try and display the information backwards. So you can see here, I'm seeing January, and then each year that I have a month of January. That might be a way some people want to look at it, and might not be. So I want to go ahead and group these two fields so that I don't wind up having to worry about that. So to do this, we're going to go back to our designer and use this groups page, and we're going to add a group. Going to select in here that we want the year and the month in that group, and now run the project again. So once again, I have about the same display that I had, but if you can see it, there's a little line between month shipped and year shipped. And if I try and move one field, both fields wind up getting moved. So there's a little more structure to the presentation here. Now I can still do things like hide the months, and I can even come in here and do things like filter the year, and it really allows for a lot more control over what the end user may want to do. You might even want to like group the category and product name as well. I hope you enjoyed this quick introduction to the pivot grid control in WinForms. There's a blog post that outlines almost everything that I've done here, so please look to the blog if you'd like some more information. Or as always, please feel free to reach out to me so I can help. Once again, this is Woody Pewitt from DevExpress. Thank you.